Zoe Cross, thank you so much for your time to speak with me on the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you very much, Tom. I mean, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm thrilled to be here.
Super. Zoe, I'm inspired by the work that you do. You work to empower those with a visible difference. And you and I met on a course that we were taking in relation to TEDx talks, because we've each done a TEDx talk. We pursued that opportunity, and we each in our respective areas found that opportunity and took the opportunity. And that's how we first came across each other. But I was always impressed with the work that you do and the story that you've got to tell about the work that you do as well. I think it's incredibly empowering. So you experience something called moebius syndrome in the UK and Moebius syndrome in the US. Is that correct?
Moebius syndrome.
Moebius syndrome in the US and Moebius syndrome in the UK. So slight difference of terminology there. But could you tell us a little bit about what that is? Some of our audience will be viewing this. They'll be viewing the video of this, and some of the audience will be listening to it only.
Moebius. Now I tend, because I have a lot of contacts in the US, I sometimes adapt and say Moebius syndrome. So it's congenital facial paralysis, and what essentially is wrong, let's say. The causes are not exactly clear. There is research being done, but essentially it's the 6th and 7th cranial nerve which has not developed, because I'm based in Germany, and I found out so much about Moebius syndrome. Although I was born with it, I actually really only found out so many more details when I was about 41. Because I knew what I had. I knew it was facial paralysis, and that was really all I knew. And that was okay for 40 years. But basically, what everyone has in common is that they have some one-sided or bilateral facial paralysis, which means usually the mouth, but so many muscles are affected because there are no nerves to move the muscles in the mouth, lip, tongue area, swallowing, so all kinds of things. Speech, of course, can be affected, as it is. My informal study of people who have Moebius syndrome, because I'm part of the Moebius syndrome association in Germany, but now have quite a lot of contacts in the US as well. In fact, I'm privileged to be speaking there this year. But with one-sided paralysis, I have the feeling that speech is not as affected as if you have paralysis on both sides.
Right.
And let's say something that's, I think, common to everyone as well is that we cannot move our eyes from side to side, and there may be difficulty, not perfect lid closure. So they're the more, let's say, the obvious things. And okay, other things can be very different from person to person. What can be common actually is foot formation or hand formation. That can be impacted as well. But what we all have in common is this very visible difference in the face.
Okay. So Zoe, how did that, besides the physiological aspects of the condition. How did it affect you? How did it affect you growing up? What sort of impact did it have on your life?
I think one of the major issues that I always had to contend with was that because of the lack of facial expression, it's very, I mean, there's literally a part of the communication toolkit is missing. And people would think that I wasn't, that maybe I wasn't quite mentally alert. They couldn't read me. And what people tended to conclude from that was that I was slightly less maybe mentally able. And this was a huge issue just going to primary school. For example, fortunately, I had extremely supportive parents, very matter of fact, and I would also say not pushy, but they just knew that I belonged in a normal, let's say, whatever normal is, primary school. And the interesting, actually, they didn't have difficulties persuading the teachers. It was actually more because the teachers could see that I was definitely able. And it was the parents actually who had more doubts about me in the beginning.
The parents of other kids, is that?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
I can't say any more on that because I don't remember that. That was I was about 4, must have been about 4 at the time. But of course, I grew up. So many situations where somebody would say, yeah, this place is not for the disabled. I mean, that sentence in itself is very difficult. And I think, well, firstly, am I disabled? And that that was an issue. Am I disabled? And okay, if I am, then why can't I still be here?
Yes, absolutely.
Literally something happening, something that happened in a swimming pool. Fortunately, and because of course other people have expressions, and I very well know how to read other people's expressions, even if I myself can't imitate them. I could see, you can see I've talked to other people with this syndrome, and we've discussed that you can see it working behind other people's faces. And how do I approach this person? And the reactions are very, very different as well. Some people today people come to me and say, can you help me? Can you help me? And they ask me a fairly complicated question. And you say, okay, this is nice. But there were times, depending on the situation, where people would make a special effort to explain something to me. Okay, I mean, I appreciate that, but it's not really needed. But it's something that I've learned really to accept, to say, well, they don't know me. These people don't know me, and they are probably seeing somebody like me for the first time in their lives. So I've always really, certainly, it's helped me a lot to say, just in the same way that people didn't understand you, don't be that person to criticize or judge somebody else because they don't understand exactly where you're coming from.
There's some powerful points in there, Zoe, especially about that sense of belonging. Do I belong here? Because if other people are asking you that question when you're growing up, and they're making assumptions only based on the very, very little that they see of you, then that must make you think, well, do I belong here? Where do I belong? Did you get a feeling of that when you were growing up?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there's a double, or there's another dimension to that. Oh dear, there's a double, and today I think it's my speciality today that no, I don't belong. I don't belong to one area. I've never belonged to one area. It's never been straight and simple. Dare I say today, I'm happy to say boring. In the sense that when I was 9, one anecdote, when I was probably a child, 6, 7 years old, I found a new friend on the street. And this was in the Republic of Ireland. So that was still in Ireland. And she said, yeah, so what's your name? And I had a relatively unusual name at the time. Zoe was a fairly unusual name. And I thought, I wish I could have a normal name. And so I came up to her. I just came up with the name Lisa. Yeah, my name's Lisa. Because I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted to be like everybody else. And so so that was me trying to belong by sort of being normal like everyone else. And then it got worse. And that was, maybe it was I wouldn't say traumatic, but it was a very interesting experience. When I was 9, my parents moved back to Germany. So they knew German, and I knew a tiny bit of German because I'd been to Germany once on holiday with them because they had, let's say, professional ties in Germany.
Yeah. And
so my dad went back to Germany. He found a position again in Germany and moved the whole family. And I was 9, I was the eldest. And being that age, it was very easy. It was relatively easy for us to get completely immersed in German culture and to learn the language very, very quickly. But I was always a bit special. And I didn't like this because in the beginning, first of all, I can't speak German, or I'm having difficulty speaking German. That I overcame that very quickly, relatively quickly. But I always had this funny name that was even more funny in Germany. And then this other thing. I could tell so many stories.
I bet.
Yeah.
It's probably sufficient to say that you had various different dimensions of difference, and you were feeling as though you wanted to belong, so to speak, and that you wanted to not have any more dimensions of difference, so that you could just kind of fit in, and that there wasn't this, there wasn't that, there wasn't the other. It was just okay. I can just kind of slot in. So how did you overcome that desire to just fit in and, as you put it, be normal, quote unquote? Not that normal exists in any way, shape, or form, but how did you overcome that, and how did you learn to embrace yourself and your uniqueness, your speciality, if you like, your individuality?
That is a long process. Let's say the first thing that I realized, I wasn't really consciously aware of this, but I think what I did do very well was I was academically able. I was able to work. I was able to study, and I think I was also able to break the ice. Actually, actually, now I know that I did the Gallup Strengths Finder.
Okay, yeah,
and one of the five key top strengths is harmony.
right, brilliant.
And I remember a situation where we're just meeting some old friends, but I was the one who was breaking the ice there. Said, well, we can't stand around here like this. And just not saying that, but just reaching out and starting to ask, let's say, curious questions.
Yeah.
So that, on the one hand, reaching out, that became. So I am not an extrovert. I'm very much an introvert. But I knew I have to make. I just somehow learned it's easier if you make the first step. You don't give people too much time to make assumptions, but reach out to them, help them with maybe fear and uncertainty.
Yes.
And the other issue, what certainly helped me was that I was able to focus. I was able to study. I loved school. I loved learning, and that certainly helped me then to, let's say, to go to university, which in itself was a completely new world. And again, it opened up a completely new culture, not just the academic culture, but then there's this other dimension that I went to Japan. I studied Japanese culture,
wow.
Which in turn, let's say, opened more doors for me.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds, Zoe, like you were very much engaged in knowing yourself. Like that saying goes, that ancient Greek saying goes, that was written on the Delphi temple, know thyself. It sounds to me as though you've very much been engaged, like you mentioned, the Gallup Strengths Finder, and that I've done that as well. It's one of a few things that I've done in figuring out who I am along the way. It's not, you couldn't, like you say, it's a long process. You couldn't say that any one of these things is the be all end all, but each of them, they give another breadcrumb along the path, so to speak. And it's interesting that you started off with that at the outset of figuring out, learning more about yourself, and then playing to those strengths. You mentioned, incidentally, the Strengths Finder, which is what that is branded as, but also your own strengths in relation to academia as well, and focusing on that. So you're not just sat there thinking, oh, I want to fit in, thinking about what is it that I'm good at, where do I want to be, where do I thrive on being? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're reminding me of something that I now find very important. And we maybe talk about that later. But absolutely, finding your purpose, or finding what is enjoyable for you, or something that lights you up, rather than, yes, exactly, focusing on how to fit in, but where do I find something that I'm good at? Where do I find and follow those, sort of explore and then dare to follow things that light you up, that are fun for you, and which you may well be good at.
Yeah. So in that regard then, Zoe, in terms of really focusing on what it is that lights you up, what it is that you're good at, and figuring out your strengths and how you're going to move forward with them, what would you say in that regard that moebius syndrome has given you? Has it given you anything? Has it helped you to learn more about your strengths?
There's a saying, I love this saying, I'm not just a pretty face, literally. I love this. I guess I had to focus on inner inner strength and on things that lit me up. And yeah, I know I wanted to compensate. I didn't realize this, I wasn't conscious of this, but essentially really what I was doing was compensating for what I perceived as a big let's say, well, failure is not the right word, but something that lost me points in the looks department. So I thought I need to, well, again, not consciously, but I basically was focusing on things that were essentially compensating for this.
Right.
Yeah, so performance in some way, whether, stage. I'm just thinking, because actually when I was, I had a strong sense of, maybe a strong sense of honor, of things needed to be done a certain way. You had a certain sense of personal honor.
Right.
In that, for example, I mean, so I think people did some unpleasant things to me. And I remember once getting my own back on that person in a very horrible way. And I did that once. I mean, I was about 5 years old at the time. And it was so horrible. I mean, I realized I've got my own back on this guy, and it felt so awful.
Yeah.
And actually, so I thought, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah, what a powerful experience. Just on that point, Zoe, just sorry to interrupt, but before you continue, was that, just for clarification more than anything, did you feel bad about doing that because of what you'd done and the damage it had caused, or was it because you'd been told off, you'd been scolded by parents, or?
Yeah, great question. No, I was not. Nobody found out about this.
Right. Okay.
Nobody knew. I mean, that was pretty cool. But yeah, and in fact, the other anecdote as well was similar. I mean, I had plenty of people criticizing me, etc. But in that instance, nobody found out what I had done.
Right.
And another instance was where, let's say, I was practicing to go on let's say it's a dance performance. Must have been about 8 years old at the time, and I'd practiced with the other girls, and I remember on the day of the performance, looking at all these other girls, 8 years old, 7 years old. Everyone's got their special uniforms on or something. And I remember thinking, yeah, they look so amazing. Who are you? Why do you need to go on the stage? So I thought, yeah, nobody's going to notice. And I'm leaving, because that was 2 weeks before we were leaving for Germany. So I thought, well, who cares anyway? I'm just going to hide behind the stage. I was just accidentally not go on stage. And my parents were there, and they said, what happened? And I think I just said, yeah, I just couldn't do it. I just didn't feel like it. And they were very okay. Today I think I was surprised that the reaction was very okay, all right then, very accepting.
Yeah.
And it was 1 or 2 years later that I was in Germany, and by then I had learned enough German to be semi-confident in basically confident in everyday conversation. And I was at this theatre performance, amateur dramatic society. And I saw this person on stage, and I just thought, I want to be on stage. And I thought, I want to compensate for being a coward 2 years ago. And I don't know, there was something, and nobody was telling me to do this. It's like this
wow.
sense of honor, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think this is something to really focus on, Zoe, because this sense of honor that you mentioned is so important, because it sounds to me like what we typically call conscience, the idea that there's a still small voice within you that's telling you that it was wrong to get revenge on that particular individual when you were a child. Nobody had known that you had even done this thing, yet you felt that within yourself. And also the idea that you'd taken the option to not go on stage earlier, but you within yourself were saying, no, I need to do this. I need to step out. I need to be seen. I need to be present in that particular environment. This is so interesting, because sounds to me like you are taking control of your life, and you're actually thinking, I don't want to live my life in a way that is like the worst that I see in the world, or the worst way that somebody treats me. And also, I don't want to take the easiest option either. So how would you, just in a nutshell, how would you define this honor that you've spoken about? Because I think this is something really powerful, and I think it could resonate with a lot of people.
How would I define? Yeah, I guess I would try. There's also this influence, Bible influence, treat others as fuck. If you don't know any differently, because of course there are different cultures, and of course I've experienced a very different culture in the form of Japan. But if you don't know any differently, to try to treat others as you would like to be treated. And again, this was part of my TEDx talk. To get curious, if somebody is treating you in a maybe not optimal way, not really the way that you would like to be treated, first of all, try to become curious, to accept at some level, so that you can become curious and try to find out what's happening on the other side, why they are treating you like this.
Yeah.
So that you can find out more about them, and possibly then find a solution to that situation.
That's fantastic. I love that really is honor for me. What you're describing there does describe honor, because it isn't purely transactional. You're not mentioning it there in a view to get gain from somebody, thinking, oh well, if I get to know them, if I get to understand them, then they might be useful to me in the future. This is you thinking about just building on something that is almost metaphysical, if you like. It goes beyond the idea of having a transactional relationship with somebody, and doing something that is beyond what is required of you. Because a lot of people in the world will say, well, if somebody treats you badly, then screw them, or something to that effect. Forget them. You don't have to do any of that. That's on them. And then what I find can happen in that view, if that's how we view people, and we take that attitude, then those negative feelings, that resentment can fester in us, and that resentment can then lead to other things like malevolence, ill will, and bad intentions. And that's probably what you learned from a very young age when you exacted your revenge on the boy. It didn't actually feel very good. So it's amazing that you were able to learn that at such a young age without any adult interference. You didn't have anybody there saying, naughty girl, don't ever do that again, or whatever. You actually felt that within yourself. You felt, I don't like how I feel. I don't like how I feel about myself because of what I've done. So I think what you're saying here, there's a message here for the world as we are at the moment, with this tendency towards resentment, this tendency towards seeking retribution, seeking revenge. There's a lot to be taken from what you've said there, I think.
That's yeah. I mean, just that's it. It's not really expecting anything from the other side and just trying to understand you. I think because if you're and this is actually something I see with the people I sometimes work with, people with a visible difference. It is very let's say it is natural, it is very easy to feel this resentment for that somebody's ignoring you or somebody's not treating you in the right way, and then you can focus that on the fact that you look different. You can attribute that to this difference, and half the time it's either because the person is having a bad day. That would be a simple, more simple issue. It could very well be that they are a little bit uncertain about you because they haven't experienced anyone like you before. And there are so many things that can be happening on the other side. And the thing, if we can reserve that judgment and try to come from a more accepting place, that is, because I love energy work, and it's a completely different energy that you can then bring to that interaction. And energy is then reflected on the other side.
For sure. I like what you say there. It reminds me of that saying, an aphorism or a maxim, if you like, assume positive intent. The idea of assuming positive intent, not assuming that because somebody's looked at you funny or because they appear to have ignored you, it's because of X, Y, or Z about me. It's always going to be something about them, because that was their choice of behavior. It's just whether consciously or subconsciously, it's just what is going on with them. Maybe they had an argument with the spouse before they left to go to work that day. Maybe they've just got some really bad news from home about something else. Maybe something difficult has happened elsewhere, or maybe it's just because they feel awkward within themselves. They feel insecure within themselves. So I think that's really powerful that we don't project onto other people what it is that we're feeling inside, or making these assumptions when we don't have the knowledge, we don't understand the intention. And until we do know the intention, until we have had those conversations. And like you said earlier, I love what you said earlier about closing the gap. So you being proactive and speaking to people quite quickly and quite promptly, so you can close the gap. So there isn't there isn't room for that rumination. There isn't room for any awkwardness at all. You're closing that, and you're being proactive. You're stepping forward, and you're speaking to people proactively, so that there isn't that sense of wondering about how is it with this person, how is it with that person. So I absolutely love that. So much of what you're saying, Zoe, is I think so empowering for people in so many different contexts. People who don't feel, for whatever reason, that they don't fit in, or that they're different, or that people might be looking at them in a certain way, and they might esteem them to be enemies, but they might be esteeming them to be enemies mistakenly, I think.
That's basically it for me. Because I think something though that I'd like to pick up on was that this consciousness, it is, when I think about it now, it's remarkable, because I did the Strength Finder, for example. This is all relatively recent, and I have the impression from what I heard from you that you maybe had the benefit of learning a little bit more, being a little bit more conscious than I was at an earlier age. I don't know, but I had no idea. I had no idea about psychology, personal development, and in fact, from my family's side, there was a distaste for it. Interestingly, and that was just because of a personal Of all things, my uncle, my dear and only real blood relative uncle, he was a psychiatrist.
Okay.
He'd written a couple of books, so he was at a British university lecturing. However, unfortunately, there was some discord, and we lost touch with him, unfortunately.
Right.
And this somehow coloured the whole issue of psychology. But I think before that happened as well, because I remember as a teenager, must have been about 15, I was having issues at school, and today my take on this is that what I was doing, I was compensating for my looks, and I was compensating, and I knew I was quite okay at written schoolwork, but I was afraid of saying very much in the classroom, because I wanted to be 100% certain. I was a massive perfectionist. I wanted to be 100% certain that what I was saying was correct. Otherwise, I would be letting myself down. And this is why, so this is why I tended to be quite quiet at school. And this was an issue at school. And they said, yeah, maybe you could benefit from seeing a psychologist. And I didn't have that much say in the matter. My parents were really well-meaning, but they just didn't see the need for that at the time.
Right.
And so that very much went past me.
Interesting. I wonder, just on that point that you mentioned about perfectionism, I can completely relate to what you're saying about being at school and not wanting to stick my hand up and say something, because I was very similar, and I had my differences were probably more, they weren't invisible, but I have always been very different, and I've always felt very different in any situation. I've always felt like I'm different, and not. I certainly didn't feel like I was special. Let's put it like that. When I was growing up, I didn't feel like that. I felt like I was out of place, and that I was out of touch with a lot of people and a lot of scenarios. I certainly wasn't part of the herd, and I felt exactly the same when I was at school. In that, if I was going to step up, if I was going to stick my head above the parapet, so to speak, I had to get it right. Otherwise, it would be devastating for me. If I got something wrong, or I made a fool out of myself, then it would be absolutely devastating to do that. So, Zoe, I'm really interested in relation to your story. How did you get to that point where you didn't feel that you had to compensate, where you didn't feel that you had to be perfect, and that you are enough as you are?
Yeah, that was maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But yes, because I did go through a time at work. So I had quite a good career to some extent at the company, where I've now been for 22 years, 22 and a half years. But it had to get worse before it could get better.
Sure.
Because so things were going really well, and I was going from strength to strength at work, and I was developing, and I had a lot of knowledge, very technical knowledge, and then this is a very, it's a longer process, but to try and abbreviate this as much as I can.
Sure.
Well, let's say I had some bullying. There was,
Yeah.
I had some interesting bosses for a couple of years. And what's interesting is that I survived.
Yeah.
I survived these bosses. And I then discovered later I had some amazing, and I think because I had with hindsight, it seems I had a very good reputation at work. People, I didn't realize this, but people seemed to respect me. And I actually dared to say something it was not really diplomatic. Right. But once I got out of this bullying situation, I basically said, this person, can't say exactly what this, but this person should not really have treated me this way. And I'm not talking about me, treating anyone this way is not acceptable. Something like that.
Sure.
And I thought, wow, that's quite, I had a certain position in the company. I thought, I'm going to say this because I don't want anyone else to go through this either. No. And I later discovered, once I was out, I had somebody in the company who said, okay, no, I see, come back and work for me. I said, okay, yeah. And those two people, one of them was later fired, and the other person went back to Japan. He was Japanese, and I was told that he was no longer managing people. He was told, you can do lots of things, but you will not be managing people again.
So sorry, Zoe, just to clarify for listeners, these people were the people who'd been bullies and they'd been using bullying behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so so it's a long story, but basically that, because I was also helping other people, I was an employee representative, and that was one of my roles, was to help other people in similar situations. Yeah. And I thought, because I discovered the power of coaching, I thought, actually, I think I would love to learn more about this.
Yeah.
But this basically triggered a whole lot of personal development for me. Yeah. Including, then getting into the romantic field and finding love. So that was one part of the development.
Fantastic.
But it was also thinking, I think I have a message. I think I've got things happening here at the company. I've got things to do here. But I think what I've been through, and because I also then discovered this worldwide community, because then social media was coming along, of all these people with a visible, we call it visible difference. Yeah. Surely there are other people in this who've been through something vaguely similar to me. Yeah. And I don't really want anyone else to be going through that kind of thing themselves. Yeah. And it was really in the process of building up that business as well, that I realized I had been very perfectionist in my work area. And it was then, as I realized, what's more important than being perfect is actually getting out there and the courage to say something, and it doesn't have to be, and the courage to say something that maybe isn't quite perfect.
Yes. Wow. I love that anecdote, Zoe, that idea about you thinking about how you can help other people, thinking about how you can coach other people, with a visible difference. And then as you're getting into that, it sounds to me like as you were getting into that work, you were learning about how to coach other people with a visible difference. You started to apply your learning to yourself as well. And that's so resonant with me. I can't tell you how resonant that is with my own experience of doing the mentoring work that I'm doing in relation to self-governance, because I've had to, for me, I feel as though I've been on a curriculum, if you like. I've been on my own curriculum. I've had to do my own curriculum on myself, because it's not just about learning the stuff. It's not just about creating the curriculum yourself and teaching it to other people. It's about making sure that you live it step by step, and you go through all the different nooks and crannies, so that when people talk to you, you're then able to relay not just the theory, not just the steps, not just the processes or the frameworks, but also the emotion of what it was like when I was in this situation, and this is what I faced, and this is how I overcame it. So this ties in beautifully, Zoe, with the work that you do now as a coach, empowering professionals with a visible difference. How is it that you help people in that context?
Well, I've actually got 9 steps because I've developed this curriculum. So there are basically 9 steps to this, but it starts with acceptance. I will go into that detail because I can get very detailed as well.
Go ahead.
But, just for that detail, just to make, for me, it's an important distinction, is that people can have a visible difference from birth, like me, but people can also acquire one.
Right.
And I think there's some research being done now, fairly new, that has actually already shown that people with a congenital difference are, well, I would say it's obvious from personal experience. It's obvious, but it is good to have that research to say that we do obviously have a head start in resilience. It can be hugely traumatic for somebody who sometimes overnight you'll wake up in the morning, you've got a massive pain somewhere, and half your face is paralyzed. That can happen.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that requires, let's say, that can require more grief work, acceptance work. What is also very important really is beliefs, and that really, you try to look as individually, because at the moment I work more one-on-one than anything else, to look at what they've been, let's say, what they've been told in the past, what kind of reactions they're getting, but what are their real beliefs about their self-worth with this difference.
That's so important, because we live in a world that to me looks and seems very materialistic, especially if you look on social media and what has been put in front of people, not just kids, not just young people, but adults as well. Everything seems very materialistic. It seems very image focused. That's difficult for anybody. But in the context that you're working, how do you help people to navigate that reality? I say reality, but it's not a reality, is it? Because there are filters that people use. People use all sorts of trickery to make them, to enhance their presentation of themselves with different tools and different platforms. So how do you help people to overcome that and not step into that game, so to speak, to transcend that and to move beyond that and to find the self-worth and the inner wealth, as you put it, for themselves and in themselves?
And that's an interesting question. In the sense that actually I myself have not worked with. I mean, that is a huge issue. What you're referring to, a huge issue of teenagers or young people, but of course all of us really being influenced by what we see on social media, even without a visible difference. But one of the so we do look a lot at inner wealth, and because first of all, when we look at comparisons, I mean, part of the program is about looking at other people, comparing them, and what I often say to people is, somebody looks at somebody else and says, "Oh wow," if they relate positively to this person, "Wow, she looks so beautiful," and I sometimes like to provoke them a little bit and say, could you imagine that some of that beauty that you see in that other person, that could actually be a reflection of what you are yourself? It's quite provocative, but
wow, powerful though, very powerful.
So we do go into a lot of comparisons because, I mean, I was a massive, I was quite, I mean, I still see myself comparing, and of course, I'm very conscious, try to be conscious as possible, of myself, comparing myself to other people. But to say, you can use comparisons. Comparisons are great, as long as you are using them to empower yourself. And as long as the story, I mean, because I'm all about talking about what is the inner story, what is the story, or what are the thoughts that you are telling yourself, consciously, subconsciously, and helping people to become more conscious of all the narrative that's going on inside their head. And comparison. So looking, and because there's a massive narrative going on as well when we're looking at social media. And if we can learn to, so I teach people also to start telling themselves a different story about themselves, about what they see on social media, and about what they really, what is their real value, way beyond external appearances, or even way beyond what their current job position is. That's an external thing that people can judge, but is that really your worth, or are you much more than that?
Yeah, I love that point about narrative, Zoe, in the sense that it's important for us to be aware and be conscious that there are narratives that are going on in our heads, whether we like it or not. There are narratives about ourselves. There are narratives about who we are. There are narratives about other people, our relationships with other people, our relationships with other places, what things mean. Everything is a narrative, because that's how our minds work. Everything is broken down into a story of some way, shape, or form. So it's not just people who are into storytelling for personal branding that think about stories or that have stories. It's literally everybody. But if we step into that process and we take ownership and say, right, I am going to take control of my narrative, my story, then we take real ownership of our lives, and we can have greater, what I call greater self-governance, in the sense that we are the ones who are governing our lives as individuals, but also in relation to our relationships, and also in relation to what it is that we've got to offer as well. So like you were mentioning about your journey that you've been on, you have done a great deal of work to move forward and use your challenges, if you like, as a springboard. So you've experienced pain through your challenges, but instead of becoming resentful about those challenges, instead of trying to run away from those challenges and numb yourself, you've chosen the path of learning, and a path of learning which ultimately leads to creating something and then to contributing something. And that, you talk about honor, that for me is the most honorable thing that you can do in response to pain, is to decide that you are going to transform that pain into a positive contribution. And that comes through learning, it comes through creating, and then through making the contribution itself. So I love your story, Zoe, and we could talk for hours and hours about this. I'm absolutely sure about that. There's so much that people can learn from you. There's so much within just this podcast episode that people can learn from you. So before we sign off, I've got to ask, where else can people find you? You mentioned that you've done a TEDx. I mentioned that you've done a TEDx as well. Where can people find the TEDx talk? Is it online?
It's currently simply on YouTube.
Yeah.
I can
we can put it in the show notes at the end, so I can stick it in. I can stick it in with all the notes there. But suffice it to say that your TEDx talk is online. What's it called?
Overcoming Rejection by Smiling from the Heart.
Brilliant. Well, that is well worth looking at. Zoe, thank you so much for your time. Again, you've given us so much to think about. Yours is a really inspiring story. There's so much wisdom there, and I just love the goodness that shines through in what you say in overcoming these things that so many people are grappling with now. Things like resentment, things like the inclination for revenge and retribution. It is so needed. And I love how you mentioned about the Gallup results that you got on harmony as being one of your strengths, because that really shines through, and that's what we need so much right now. We need harmony. We need people coming together and complementing each other, and not just in spite of differences, but because of differences, because we're different, because we've got something different to contribute to each other, and not see these things as threats, not see these things as points of comparison where we're going to size each other up and say, well, where am I in relation to you on this imaginary league table which doesn't even exist? So Zoe, thank you so very much for your time on the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you, Tom.